Welcome back. In this section, we are going to understand and then implement the continuous integration and continuous delivery concepts in AWS. We are going to use AWS code services to achieve the CI/CD. So these are the list of code services we have in our AWS: code commit, code build, code deploy, and then code pipeline. We are going to do it in two phases for each code service. So we are going to do it manually using the AWS Web Console and then understand it in detail. And then after that, we will do the same using the CloudFormation by creating a template. So let's start with CI/CD now. So let's see what are the stages in our software release process. So the first stage is source. In source, we check in the source code and we also do peer review with new code. So then we move on to the build phase. So in build phase, we compile code and then build the artifacts like war files. In addition, we also do unit tests. So once build is completed, we move on to the test phase. So in test phase, we perform the integration test with other systems. We also do load testing and also UI testing and security tests. So once test phase is completed, we move on to the production. So in production, we deploy to production environments and then we monitor code in production to quickly detect errors. Let's see which phases come under which area. Like if we see source and then build stage, so those come under the continuous integration. In the same way, if we see test and production from end to end, source, build, test and production, we can say if these are completely automated, then it is called continuous delivery. So in the same way, in the continuous delivery process, we can see here there is a breakage. So this is mainly like before going to production, we can do the manual approvals. So when coming to continuous deployment, we can see that there is no manual intervention. So developer checks in the source and then build will happen. Tests will happen automatically and then it will go to the production. So that's called the continuous deployment. So only difference is in continuous delivery, before going to production, we are doing the manual intervention for necessary approvals required. So now in addition to that, we'll see a simple concept about infrastructure as code here. So I just put it here because in the next section, after completing CI/CD, we are going to understand infrastructure as a code and the complete pipeline with all these stages we are going to implement. So infrastructure as code also we are going to implement in detail in our next section. So continuous integration. So let's see what are the continuous integration items. So it should automatically kick off a new release when new code is checked in. We need to build and test code in a consistent, repeatable environment. Continually have an artifact ready for deployment. And for continuous delivery, so we can see here, automatically deploy new changes to the staging environment for testing. Deploy to production safely without affecting customers. Deliver to customers faster. So increase deployment frequency and also reduce change lead time and change failure rates. So that's about the continuous delivery features. So now if you see AWS developer tools or code services in relation with these phases, we can see in detail now. So which service fits in under which release stages. So let's see source stage. So in the source stage, we will use the AWS code commit service. In the build stage, we are going to use the AWS code build service. So in test stage, we'll use the AWS code build. In addition to that, we also can use any third-party build tools. In addition, if you see the deploy, for the deploy, we have the AWS code deploy service. And for monitoring, we have AWS X-Ray and then Amazon CloudWatch. So all these together will be managed by a single AWS code service named AWS Code Pipeline. So we can create pipelines to handle all these stages together. So if you see here continuous integration comes under AWS code commit and then code build. And for continuous delivery or continuous deployment, we can see all these AWS code commit, code build, and then deploy, X-ray, CloudWatch, all these come under continuous delivery or continuous deployment. And then code pipeline achieves that feature for us from AWS perspective. So now let's go to the next one. So if you see here, AWS code commit it's a version control service. We can privately store and manage source code, secure and then highly available. So from build and test perspective, we use the code build. So code build is a fully managed build service, compiles source code, runs tests, and then produces software packages. It can scale continuously and process multiple builds concurrently. So no build servers to manage manually. So we can also pay by minutes only for compute resources we use. Monitor build through CloudWatch events. It supports following programming languages as its runtimes. So like Ruby, Python, PHP, Node, Java, Golang, .NET Core, Docker, and then Android. From deployment perspective, we use the code deploy as a service. So it automates code deployments to any instance and also for the Lambda. It avoids downtime during application deployment. Rollback automatically if failure detected. It deploys to Amazon EC2 instance, Lambda, or on-premise servers. When coming to monitors, we use the CloudWatch or X-ray for our monitoring. So when coming to CloudWatch, it monitors source check-ins and then triggers the builds. Monitors the builds and monitors infrastructure, and also it can collect the logs. So when coming to code pipeline is a continuous delivery service for fast and reliable application updates. So it can model and visualize our software release processes. It builds, tests, and then deploys our code every time there is a code change. So integrates with third-party tools and also internal AWS tools. Like now it can integrate with code commit, code build, code deploy, like that. So in this section, we will primarily start with the code commit service. So what we'll do in code commit service is, we'll build a simple REST service using Java Spring Boot. And then we'll check in that code to local repo and then push to code commit. So as a developer, I will create a simple REST service application and then I'll check in the code to local Git repo. So then I will push the same code to the AWS code commit service. So this completes my basic code commit exploration and then implementation. From here, I'll move on to implementing the other services both via AWS Web Console and also via CloudFormation. Let's see side by side what we are going to do those things. So for code build, we are going to implement on AWS Web Console. So in AWS Web Console, so as a developer, I'm going to check in the code to local Git repo and then it will be available in the code commit, which we have seen in our previous step. So now we are going to create a code build project and then generate the build and then store it in the simple storage service, that is nothing but S3. So we are going to understand about code build service on how to generate builds using AWS Web Console and then store that in the S3. In addition, for code build, we need the build spec.yaml. So that one also we are going to understand the phases inside the build spec.yaml. Install, pre-install, post-build, what we need to do, all those phases. And then that one also we are going to check in to our application. And then we are going to run the build and then store the artifacts in the simple storage service. So now we have done everything via AWS Web Console. So now we can do the same using the CloudFormation. So we are going to learn that now. So via CloudFormation also, using code build using AWS CloudFormation. So we are going to first create a code build template. So for creating the stack in CloudFormation, we need the template to be created. So for that template, what we are going to do is, we are going to create a code build service role. So first thing in our template is code build service role. So in the manual case, it auto generates when we are creating the code build project. But here we are going to generate it. We are going to write it in detail in our CloudFormation template. Then we'll work on creating the code build project in a CloudFormation template, which needs the code commit to be as its source and S3 as its artifacts. So this completes our code build template creation for creating the stack in CloudFormation. So then we'll go ahead and then create this stack in the AWS CloudFormation console. And then we will go ahead and then push our code to as a developer to the code commit repo. And then we can run the code build and see that our latest artifacts got created using the new code build project which we have created using the code build stack. So this completes the exploration of code build using web console and also code build using CloudFormation. So that's about the code build exploration side by side. So we are going to do this side by side, which means like first we'll do the AWS web console and then we'll do the AWS CloudFormation. So then we'll move on to the AWS code deploy. So this one also we are going to implement it first as a web console. In the web console, if you see it here in the previous section, we have completed till here, which means developer comes and then pushes his code to local git, from local git to code commit, and from code commit to code build, and the build is generated and then it is present now in the S3, right? So now what we are going to do is we are going to introduce the code deploy service. So this code deploy service will pick the artifacts from the S3 storage and then deploys it to the EC2 instance. So for that, in code deploy, we create an application deployment group and also a deployment. So we'll have 3 objects to do that. So those 3 objects we create it manually using web console and then we will do it. Once we do that, we can go ahead and then access the application using internet. As we completed implementing it in web console for code deploy service, we'll move on to doing the same in the CloudFormation. So what we'll do in CloudFormation is, so if you see it here, first we'll create a EC2 app stack. So what it will have is a 2 EC2 instances, staging EC2 instance, production EC2 instance, which we will be eventually using in our pipelines in detail. But we'll start creating the EC2 app stack. And in EC2 app stack, we also need to associate a instance profile to the EC2 instances to allow EC2 instances to access the S3 service to get the artifacts. So we'll add the EC2 instance profile there. And then we'll create the code deploy stack now. So first we created the EC2 app stack in CloudFormation console by creating the template for these things with staging EC2 instance, production EC2 instance, and then role for all these. By writing all this in the template, we created this template and then we created a stack in the AWS CloudFormation. So now we are in the code deploy stack. In code deploy stack, what we'll do is, so we'll create, earlier we have created the code deploy, code build service role in our previous section. So now we'll add the code deploy service role. And then we'll move on to adding the code deploy objects in the CloudFormation template. So that is application deployment group. And then we'll also add the deployment object. Once we add the, so we'll create the application and then deployment group object and then we'll create the stack. After that, again we'll add the deployment object and then update the stack. At that time, the deployment happens to the EC2 instance. So once the deployment happens to the EC2 instance, then user will be able to access the REST service from our staging EC2 instance. So this completes the code deploy, exploration and then implementation using AWS Web Console and also using AWS CloudFormation. So now we'll move on to AWS code pipeline. So code pipeline using AWS Web Console. So we'll see that now. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and then create a pipeline. In the pipeline, first thing is to select the source from our code commit. Then we'll create the code build project using pipeline. Then we'll also select our artifact store where our code pipelines artifacts need to be stored. So then we'll also create the or associate the code deploy objects already present, which is nothing but application and then deployment group. And then we will also add the EC2 instance tags in the code deploy object. So those also will be part of the pipeline. So now this becomes the complete pipeline. In addition, CloudWatch also will be part of this mix. Whenever a change happens to code commit, CloudWatch event will be triggered and then pipeline will trigger from source to deployment at the end. So that's the thing. So now if you see a developer checks in the code to code commit, immediately that respective code triggers the pipeline, and pipeline will move from source stage to the build stage, and then it will complete the build and then stores the build to the S3, and from S3 it will be picked and then code deploy will take it and then deploy to the EC2 instance. So this is the way we will implement everything for code pipeline using AWS Web Console. Now we'll move on to our CloudFormation for code pipeline. So for CloudFormation, we already created this EC2 apps CloudFormation stack earlier when we are doing the code deploy, or as a prerequisite item we completed it earlier itself. This CloudFormation stack is already created and ready in our CloudFormation. Consider like that. So now we'll create the CI/CD CloudFormation stack related equivalent template. For that, what we will do is, first we will add the code commit object, nothing but code commit related details inside the CloudFormation template. That is nothing but we are going to parameterize that in our template, saying that what would be my code commit repo which I need to generate the pipeline for. So in that way we will parameterize the code commit, and also in which bucket we need to store the artifacts, that also will parameterize in our template, and then move on to the next step. In the next step we'll create the code build project in our template. So when we are creating that, we'll also create its equivalent role also, and then we'll also create the code deploy project related items. One is application and the other is deployment group. So we create the deployment group for staging. In addition, code deploy service role too. And then when we are implementing for production, we also need to implement the simple notification service for sending the email for an authorized approver to approve when deploying to the production. To do so, we will add the SNS resource in our template, and then we will also parameterize the email object in the template, so that whenever we are creating a stack, we can give an email to whom the authorized approver the email need to be sent. And when going to the next step is going to be the code deploy. So in this code deploy, this is nothing but we are going to add prod deployment group in the template at this area. And then finally we'll start adding the code pipeline stages. So those are source stage, and then build stage, and staging deploy stage, and then approval stage, production approval stage, and also production deploy stage. So all these stages we are going to create in the code pipeline template, and then we'll move on to testing it. As a developer, I'll go ahead and then check in the code. So code pipeline will pick the changes as the source got the changes. Source has the changes, source is changed, code pipeline picks up the changes and will do the build and then uploads the artifact to S3, and then code deploy will trigger for the deployment to the staging EC2 instance. So we can access it, and then we will be able to access the staging EC2 REST application. Now it will come to the prod approval stage, and then it will hold there, and then it will send an email to the respective approver. So if respective approver approves it, then it will move on to the prod deployment stage and then deploys it to the production EC2 instance. In production EC2 instance, once deployed, we can access the application from there. This completes the code pipeline AWS CloudFormation template creation and then testing end to end. So there are few prerequisites we need to know when we are doing all these things. One is we are going to do this in US East 2 region in the templates. So we have hard coded the image ID for Amazon Linux, which we are going to use for US East 2 region. So if we want to execute these things in other regions, so we need to ensure that respective image IDs are changed. So the reason we removed that mappings code, which has a huge amount of 400-500 lines, which has a standard template where based on region it can pick up the image ID. We have removed that because the idea is when we are writing a template, we need to know what we are writing and then what we have written. So if you get some templates which AWS provides, like finding the image ID based on region, etc., etc. So it adds 300-400 lines in your template, and then we will be confused of what we have written and what is AWS given. So I have ensured that templates are put to minimal, where we can use it and then understand in detail what we have written and then how we understood it in detail. So that's the reason we didn't add anything automatic things inside the things. For simple things like image ID, we can go to that region and then add it, right? So that's the reason. But I want to mention it in detail, because if you take this image and then try it in other region, and if it doesn't work, it's the idea is like it's mainly due to image ID. So I just want to let you know about that. And the second is default VPC. So all these templates will work when we have a default VPC in that respective region created. So that's the thing, means like these templates, we didn't give the facility to select the VPC, select the subnet, all those things. Again, code becomes bigger. The core focus is for that respective scenario, what we need to do in CloudFormation instead of generalizing everything. So we need to ensure that we have the default VPC created in the region where we are using these templates. So this completes the continuous integration and then continuous deployment for AWS services using AWS CloudFormation and also using Web Console. So I'll see you in the next lecture. Until then, bye bye. Thank you.